7¼ inch dented aluminum plate rests in tissue at Clay County Historical Society. Rim still sugared. A carbon copy memo brands the 11-ounce plate. Unusual fraternization. Yet ledger records 3 pies for prisoners as thunderlit lamplight grazes scratches. If this gentle midnight history soothes you, subscribe for more whispers. Unteroffizier Friedrich Mertens stepped from the deuce and a half at dawn, boots sinking into mud, laced with crushed alfalfa, the scent green and damp against the lingering diesel that clung to his jacket. Lamplight spilled from a Kansas barn door, not the blinding glare he braced for, but a honey-coloured glow that softened the edges of pitchforks hung like quiet sentries along the wall. He listened for a barked command, and heard instead the simmering hiss of something baking, a gentle percussion from cast-iron skillets in the farmhouse kitchen beyond. The guard's bayonet stayed lowered, the metal bandolier creaking as the man cleared his throat and gestured toward a long table dusted with flour, apples sliced thin and fanned like maps. Torn gloves waited beside them, coarse wool ready to warm numb wrists after hauling feed sacks. Friedrich had rehearsed the taste of punishment, expected bitterness thick as coal smoke. Yet the farmer's wife brushed him past a sleeping collie, pressed a porcelain plate into his palm, and set down a wedge of cinnamon pie whose steam fogged his spectacles brighter than any spotlight at roll call. In the War Department's quarterly survey filed in 1944, Camp Concordia listed 302 acres of leased wheat and sorghum fields, boundaries marked by cedar posts wrapped with 3 strands of barbed wire, more symbolic than stern. The report rattled off inventories: 6 Ford trucks, 2 hand-cranked sirens, 24 shovels, 48 mess trays, and an almost apologetic notation of 13 pie tins requisitioned from local kitchens for nutritional morale supplements. Guards noted that the windmills creaked at night, masking the shuffle of boots as prisoners marched to the field kitchens carrying galvanized pails perfumed with chicory coffee. The Geneva Convention charts tacked behind the mess sergeant's desk showed calorie calculations, each column penciled neat as sheet music, ensuring every slice of crust joined the ration ledger. The nearby farmers signed receipts with fingers still crusted in soil. The smell of rain-heavy earth mixing with yeast, as the bakery detail rolled dough across oilcloth etched with faint compass roses. Even the siren tests seemed half-hearted, their wails fading into meadowlark calls before the men settled back to their tin plates, astonished that dessert arrived alongside discipline. Kindness in those barracks carried the warmth of ovens more than the chill of sentry towers, and memory asks why sweetness crossed a boundary erected for suffering. Who decided kindness should taste like cinnamon when war drums still muttered far away? The question floated between cots, the air touched by soap flakes and distant locomotive whistles. Stories whispered in the dark described the first bite as both fragile and defiant, crust flaking like dry leaves under frost, reminding men that humanity can arrive wearing an apron rather than a uniform. Each reflective whisper echoed the metallic tick of the potbelly stove, proving that mercy travels on humble plates, not gilded proclamations. The sand remembers, instruments hum in gentle loops, the hollow weights beneath cottonwood shadows whispering through wire. County Extension bulletins archived in weathered filing cabinets outlined the logistics behind the generosity, pages smelling faintly of mimeograph ink that still tinged fingertips purple. Schedules detailed how work detachments loaded onto rattling school buses before sunrise, escorted by guards whose uniforms carried the leather tang of holsters, yet whose pockets bulged with orchard apples meant to break mid-morning hunger. Receipts showed sacks of flour diverted from cooperative mills, stamped with moisture percentages recorded by handheld hygrometers, ensuring crusts wouldn't crumble in the dry prairie air. The Red Cross nutritionists visited with stethoscopes glinting under kerosene lanterns, verifying that calorie counts remained within regulation, even as they noted excess dessert offerings from civilian sponsors. Farm wives swapped recipes at quilting bees, their voices muffled by cotton batting while they debated whether nutmeg or clove better soothed a captive mind. In the camp kitchens, German bakers folded dough with the precision of machinists, knuckles dusted white, the hiss of steam pipes underscoring a rhythm that sounded more like home than confinement. Years later, the men would describe the pies not as indulgence but as a language that needed no translation, a dialect of crust and spice that melted dread into something manageable. Their recollections move like fireflies over ponds, slow and luminous, proving that gestures sometimes succeed where treaties fail. Candle smoke from makeshift altars in the barracks chapel mingled with cinnamon, giving worship a bakery sweetness that blurred the line between penance and comfort. Even the straw pallets carried a faint aroma of nutmeg after the evening meal, fibers holding the comfort until dawn. The expectation of punishment curled at the edges like burnt sugar, yet the generosity stayed soft, rewiring how these soldiers imagined their captors in the quiet minutes before sleep. The motif of pie became anchor and lantern, a recurring shape that steadied thoughts whenever train whistles pulled them back toward battlefields across the ocean. Silence held because gratitude felt too sacred to shout, because some moments seemed carved from hush, the way crust is crimped by careful thumbs. Transport records from Texas, Minnesota, and Georgia detail how far those unlikely desserts traveled, mapping a web of farm-to-camp routes that stretched within a 40-mile radius of each installation. In the pine-thick air near Tyler, laundry steam mingled with pick and smoke as civilian drivers ferried warm pies in wooden crates, each crate padded with feed sacks to keep crusts intact over washboard roads. Minnesota cooperatives sent rhubarb versions perfumed with sugar that crystallized during moonlit deliveries, the boxes stacked beside bushels of sugar beets destined for canneries. Georgia's peach orchards packed latticed tops brushed with egg wash, so glossy they mirrored the lantern flares swinging from guard wrists. Military clerks logged every arrival against ration cards, fountain pens scratching like grasshoppers in the humid night, careful to note that no coercion was observed when prisoners accepted the sweet slices. The sensory map blended diesel, pollen, and pastry, a logistical symphony revealing that the backroads hummed with more than troop movements. The farmers who baked saw themselves not as rebels against regulation, but as caretakers of the soil, convinced that feeding those who tilled it was part of the covenant between land and hands. They knew surveillance could arrive without warning, so they folded their compassion into routine, letting the scent of butter mask intention. Night after night, the same stars that watched bomber routes now watched pastry cooling on windowsills, and the contrast softened even the sternest patriarchs. They understood that a slice shared beneath humming insect screens could dilute hatred more efficiently than any sermon delivered in starched pews. For generations afterward, they spoke of the prisoners rarely, not because they regretted kindness, but because the memory glowed like embers. They feared a draft of gossip might extinguish. When autumn winds rattled cornstalks like paper, the kitchens glowed amber, and dough rising in stoneware bowls perfumed the rafters. Silence in that context felt like reverence, as if words might bruise the delicate crust of the past. Inspection transcripts filed by Swiss delegates catalogued odours, textures, and temperatures inside the camps with a diligence that reads almost poetic. Thermometers hung beside bread racks recorded evening heat, their mercury columns steady at numbers meant to keep yeast alive without scalding tongues. Delegates noted the clatter of enamel mugs, the faint vanilla carried by steam swirling out of tin-lined ovens, and the crisp crack of crust shared at oak tables scarred by countless utensils. They interviewed the mess sergeant, whose ledger displayed neat columns of sugar allocations cross-referenced against Red Cross parcels, each entry initialed in blue ink that smelled faintly of ammonia. A footnote recounted how the prisoners' choir rehearsed beside the cooling racks, voices weaving with the metallic tap of ladles, their hymns lifting gently above the hiss of pressure cookers. These documents turned sensory impressions into evidence, anchoring the story in recorded detail rather than rumour. Listening to those transcripts today, one hears more than procedural compliance. There is the rhythm of generosity slipping through official language like light beneath a door. The pie appears as motif again and again, not triumphant but steadfast, reminding the listener that sustenance can be stubbornly gentle even when uniforms bristle. Veterans who revisited the camps decades later carried the scent of baked apples in their recollections, claiming it lingered longer than the clang of gates. Those pauses sounded almost like the soft knock of wooden spoons on mixing bowls, steady and reassuring amid uniforms. To them, the crust represented a truce as fragile as phyllo, maintained by hands that mixed duty with compassion. The breath between inspectors' questions holds a hush thick as steamed milk, suggesting a shared understanding that kindness need not be loud to be revolutionary. Evening dew cools the wire, harmonicas murmur, distant coyotes comment, and the ledger waits beneath a folded towel. A 96-page diary recovered from a cedar chest in Nebraska opens another layer of evidence, its paper scented with camphor and faint apple peel after decades among quilts. The author, a schoolteacher hosting POW labourers, recorded the daily exchange of labour for pastries, describing clay-streaked boots on her porch and the soft rattle of canning jars cooling beside the stove. She pressed wildflower petals between entries, their dried sweetness echoing the desserts she set before the men after they stacked hay bales. Indentations from her pencil press through multiple pages, as if urgency pushed the lead deeper into the paper. Margins note the specific plough adjustments the prisoners recommended, the metal chilled by morning frost as they leaned in to demonstrate efficiency. Tucked inside the diary is a folded recipe card labelled simply "Victory Pie," grease spots shadowing the cursive. The diary's discovery counts as the first loop of revelation, showing how domestic routine became a testament to unexpected fellowship. Yet almost immediately after the diary entries were penned, censorship officers advised civilians to curb correspondence, lest Axis propagandists twist hospitality into weakness, and so the recipe card slid back into the cedar chest with a sigh of resignation. How do you archive a kindness the authorities caution you to conceal? The teacher wrapped her apron in brown paper, the starch crackling like dry leaves, and packed away the tin measuring cups whose handles stayed warm from constant use. The smell of nutmeg retreated behind mothballs, and the parlour clock ticked in a slower register, as if even time complied with the order for quiet. She dabbed at ink smudges that scented her fingertips, a futile act that underscored how firmly silence had been requested. Suppression settled like dust atop the chest, not malevolent but weighty, serving as reminder that official narratives preferred discipline over desert. Camp newsletters, hand-cranked through mimeograph machines, reveal how that silence manifested in print. Editors snipped references to civilian indulgences, replacing pie talk with weather summaries, lists of hymn selections, and crop yield statistics reported in pounds and bushels. The ink smelled sharp and medicinal, the type stuttering where a sentence had been removed, leaving faint ghosts of letters visible under the right slant of sunlight. Illustrations of barbed wire replaced earlier sketches of farmhouses, suggesting that the narrative was being tightened by unseen hands. Even the sports column, usually lively with descriptions of soccer matches on dusty diamonds, avoided mentioning the generous post-game treats the guards smuggled in under their coats. The machinery of omission hissed like steam escaping valves, methodically redirecting focus away from the sweetness that had become subversive. Readers later recalled the sticky feel of fresh ink on their thumbs, a residue of silence they could not fully wipe away. Still, beneath the official hush, memory perfumed the barracks like a hidden sachet. Prisoners recalled the way crust shards clung to their fingertips, how the sugar traced invisible lines across their palms long after lights out. Guards, too, carried the aroma, the scent catching in the wool of their coats, so that even after inspections they could breathe in a reminder of the humanity that softened their watch. The suppression felt like a heavy curtain, but whispers leaked around the edges, conveyed through shared glances over steaming mugs of chicory. Redemption, in that era, looked less like proclamations and more like the quiet passing of enamel plates from rough hands to trembling ones. The motif of pie remained the gentle rebel, slipping beneath directives with a wink of spice. Even the stove ash retained a sweetness, a subtle proof that generosity smoulders even when officially banked. Decades later, a community college oral history project reopened the box of memories, recording the voices of farm families whose kitchens had once smelled of double-crust apple. Microphones padded with foam captured the tremor in their speech, as they described delivering desserts still warm enough to fog the windows of pickup trucks idling in gravel driveways. Archivists noted the clicking hum of reel-to-reel tapes, the gentle scrape as interviewees unfolded, yellowed ration stamps saved as keepsakes. One farmer produced a flour sack apron embroidered with sunflowers, the fabric softened by countless washings, and explained how she wrapped pies in it to keep them insulated. Volunteers brewed coffee that perfumed the room, hoping the aroma would coax additional recollections. This rediscovery loop linked back to the diary, proving that kindness, though shelved, had not spoiled. The act of unveiling these testimonies decades later felt like lifting a pie crust to check for doneness, revealing a golden tenderness still intact beneath layers of official starch. Voices once muted emerged with the resonance of cellos, rich and steady, affirming that the prisoners had tasted more than calories. They tasted the possibility that enmity could dissolve like sugar in tea. Families spoke softly, the room smelling of brewed chamomile, as they revisited nights when lantern light painted ladders of brightness across barn rafters. The rediscovery loop made the kindness newly potent, reminding listeners that hospitality can hibernate without losing flavor. Prairie dusk breathes slow, tape reels spin, kettle lids quiver, and soft footsteps revisit gravel lanes. Beyond the plains, the experience repeated in the citrus groves of Arizona, where prisoners harvested oranges under a sun that hammered down like brass cymbals. Farm ledgers there listed dessert quotas alongside irrigation schedules, noting how many pies could be transported without the custard turning watery in the heat. Refrigerated rail cars idled nearby, their compressors humming like distant bees, ready to chill produce and pastries alike. Civilian supervisors carried leather-bound notebooks, their pages smudged with orange oil and flour as they logged work hours and dessert deliveries, ensuring accountability to both crops and conscience. A wooden citrus crate repurposed as a serving tray bore knife marks and juice stains, evidence that the tradition of shared sweetness travelled even where dust devils spun. The camp chaplain recorded in his homily outline that mercy tasted of graham crust today, grounding the motif once more in tangible detail. That desert kindness carried the scent of sun-warmed fruit, a fragrance that mingled with sweat-soaked uniforms and the metallic tang of canteens. The prisoners, expecting blistering punishment under relentless light, instead found their palms sticky with syrup as farmers passed slices shaded by canvas awnings. Some nights, the silence that followed came not from fear but from awe, as men stared at the moon rising behind saguaro silhouettes, tasting sweetness where they expected retribution. They understood that a gift can arrive even when the air vibrates with cicada buzz and distant artillery drills. The pie motif anchored them, a cool balm across cracked lips, reminding each listener that hospitality can flourish even in the most abrasive climates. The desert breeze carried citrus zest across the compound, a perfume no guard bothered to disperse. In Iowa, a stack of lacquer, 78 RPM discs preserved the camp orchestra's performances, recorded on evenings when the mess hall smelled of coffee cake and varnished spruce. The labelled track, Prisoner Polka, crackled with accordion wheeze, accompanied by the steady thunk of dough being kneaded on nearby tables. Notes scribbled on the disc sleeves mention that farmers attended rehearsals, carrying pies in cardboard bakery boxes tied with twine, setting them beside clarinet cases while musicians tuned. The camp's radio technician logged microphone voltages and ambient temperature, ensuring the wax would capture every bow stroke despite the humidity generated by simmering fruit fillings. These recordings proved that hospitality and artistry intertwined, each slice of dessert offering fuel for the music that swelled beneath rafters strung with bare bulbs. Listening to those discs now, with their pops and hisses, one hears a night where sweetness and melody met, where the scent of nutmeg wrapped itself around the tremolo of violins. The prisoners who had braced for resentment found themselves invited to waltz with farmers' daughters under ceiling fans stirring heavy summer air. How could such gentle rituals survive in the shadow of global conflict? The question lingers like powdered sugar on a cuff, light yet impossible to ignore. Perhaps the answer rests in the way community insists on nourishing every hand that labors, even those marked as enemy. Ceiling fans groaned overhead, laughter rustled like muslin skirts, and coffee percolators whispered encouragement till midnight. Not every account survived intact. In an Oklahoma camp, a grease fire swept through the commissary, scorching logbooks that detailed dessert distributions with almost military precision. The charred pages, now brittle and smelling of smoke even after restoration attempts, bear only fragments. Blueberry. Second helping authorized. Praise from civilian overseer. Firefighters reported the hiss of water hitting cast iron, the crackle as sugar caramelized to blackened shards on the floor. This accidental erasure created another layer of silence, not enforced by authority, but delivered by chance, reminding historians how easily the record of kindness can be singed away. Only a single pie server survived, its handle warped yet still glinting, suggesting resilience amid ash. The soot-streaked walls retained a faint caramel scent, as if the air itself refused to forget. The survivors of that fire spoke softly afterward, voices roughened by smoke, protecting what memories the flames spared. They described the taste of soot mingling with cherry filling, a bittersweet combination that underscored how fragile comfort could be. Neighbors arrived with replacement tins, their footsteps crunching on charcoaled cinders, proving that generosity rallies even when evidence has turned to embers. The loss of ledgers taught them to store stories in breath and heartbeat rather than on paper alone, to recite kindness like a mantra over the hiss of cooling hoses. Distant thunder rolls, aprons flutter on clotheslines, piano keys cool beneath unused fingers, and the ash-sweet air clings to dusk. Censored letters intercepted en route to Germany reveal tantalizing hints of the desserts, proving that even official black bars could not completely smother the aroma of shared sweetness. One prisoner described round gifts of crust and kindness, before the censor's pen sliced through the line, leaving a smear of ink that smelled tarry and damp. Another letter noted the crunch of sugared pecans echoing louder than the clank of chains never worn, only to have the sentence truncated by a uniformed hand. The paper itself retains the salt of ocean transit, edges curling from humidity, yet the surviving fragments testify that hospitality slipped through the net of surveillance. Even the censor's blotter sheet, preserved accidentally, bears an imprint of the word pie, the ink reversed but unmistakable under magnifying glass. The faint imprint left a shadowy scent of iron gall, an olfactory clue to the emotions beneath the censorship. For the families who finally received these letters, the smudged hints carried the scent of possibility, like warm dough rising behind a closed oven door. They traced the redacted lines with fingertips dusted in chimney soot, imagining what flavors their sons savored in distant farmhouses. The restraint in their replies felt respectful, a mutual agreement to protect the civilians who dared to share more than regulations required. They folded their hopes into parchment, thin paper, sealing envelopes with wax that perfumed the room with frankincense, letting silence carry the rest. In that quiet pact, hospitality became a guarded ember, glowing unseen yet steadfast. The letters were stacked beside coal scuttles, absorbing warmth as though words could be proofed like bread. Another layer emerges in oral histories from black soldiers assigned as guards, men whose own treatment at home was fraught, yet who participated in this unlikely feast. Sergeant Leon Carter recalled patrolling rows of ripening wheat as nightjars cooled, the air thick with dew and the aroma of blackberry pie he had helped bake in the segregated field kitchen. His testimony described how he coordinated with farm women to deliver slices during rest breaks, ensuring protocols were respected even as generosity crossed racial and national lines. He carried a pocket notebook smelling of tobacco where he tallied portions, determined that kindness be shared equitably despite the hierarchy stamped into uniforms. His account placed pie at the intersection of multiple struggles, revealing solidarity forged through shared labor and shared dessert. The low murmur of his voice on tape blends with the distant swish of grass, a soundtrack to intricate compassion. Carter's memory settles over the narrative like a bass note, deep and resonant, reminding listeners that hospitality can challenge more than one injustice at a time. He spoke of the bite of crisp night air against his cheeks as he watched German prisoners and African American guards savor the same crust, an equality more profound than any regulation dared acknowledge. The joy tasted tart sweet, like blackberries picked at the edge of a ditch where segregation signs once stood. He kept the story quiet for years, aware that some neighbors might misread kindness as betrayal. In that guarded hush, the motif of pie shimmered as an act of quiet resistance, its aroma threading through the cold, starlit watch. His pause before describing the final bite carried the weight of a hymn verse withheld for reverence. As repatriation trains loaded, manifests noted unexpected cargo, bundles of recipes, packets of dried apple slices, and hand-turned rolling pins gifted by farmers to departing prisoners. The station platforms smelled of coal smoke and butter as farewells were exchanged, the clatter of boots on planks punctuated by the soft thump of luggage stuffed with cookbooks. Military clerks inspected each item, their gloved hands lingering on the smooth maple of the rolling pins, searching for contraband and finding only culinary tools. Some prisoners left behind thank you notes etched on rough stationery stained with coffee, promising to recreate the pies for families across the ocean. The records catalogued these gestures under miscellaneous exchanges, yet the sensory tableau told a deeper story of gratitude baked into departure. Steam from locomotives mingled with the sweetness of cooling pastries, creating a farewell perfume. The journeys home carried the taste of pie as surely as they carried memories of battle, the sweetness tucked beside grief in every satchel. Prisoners pressed their noses to frosted train windows, letting the scent of the station linger as long as possible before iron wheels pulled them eastward. The hospitality they'd received became both comfort and burden, a secret they wondered whether relatives scarred by bombings could believe. Words felt insufficient, so they guarded the flavor in their mouths, hoping to recreate it with whatever ingredients ration books allowed. Moonlight paints steel rails, silver, wooden benches creak, steam sighs into cold air, and the final crumbs rest warm in gloved hands. In Rhineland kitchens shattered yet functional, former prisoners attempted to recreate the American pies using barley flour and beet syrup, improvising crusts on stoves fueled by briquettes that smelled of peat. Letters preserved by church archives contained carefully translated recipes, each specifying cup measurements that felt foreign to cooks accustomed to weights. One returnee, Otto Lang, sketched the lattice pattern on onion skin paper, annotating which spices approximated cinnamon when the genuine article was unattainable. The pans they used were dented mess tins repurposed from military kits, their metallic tang imprinting itself on the first reimagined slices. Family members gathered, inhaling the unfamiliar sweetness as coal smoke leaked through cracked windows, and listened to stories of American farmers whose kindness transcended the war. The clatter of mismatched spoons against tin bowls provided percussion for the tales. For those families, the borrowed recipes tasted like legend, a tale of enemies turned hosts that sounded unbelievable against the backdrop of shattered cities. The first bite often triggered tears because the crust flaked differently from traditional tortillas, whispering of fields far beyond the Rhine where compassion proved possible. They savoured the unfamiliar spices and imagined the glow of Midwestern farm kitchens, letting warmth seep into rooms still smelling of damp stone and smoke. Reticence followed, not from shame, but from a desire to protect the memory from cynicism, to keep it nestled like a loaf rising beneath a cloth. In their silence, the motif of pie became a private liturgy, celebrated with every careful slice. Even the echo of distant church bells seemed to soften, as if acknowledging the sacrament. When museums eventually curated exhibits on the homefront camps, they displayed the pie plate from Clay County alongside recipe cards, ration stamps, and photographs of farm suppers set under kerosene glow. Visitors leaned close to glass cases fobbed by their breath, trying to imagine the aroma that once clung to the tin. Docent scripts detailed the logistics. The convoy routes traced on maps smelling faintly of dry ink, the baker's schedules, the enforcement memos. Audio guides played excerpts from interviews where laughter mingled with the rustle of paper napkins, giving the display a layered texture that appealed to ear and imagination alike. The exhibit reasserted the motif, proving that dessert became documentary evidence when preserved with care. Even the polished floor reflected the tin's sheen, doubling the glimmer of remembered kindness. Visitors often lingered longer before that case than before the weapon displays, their shoulders relaxing as they absorbed a gentler counterpoint to the harsh clang of history. Some swore they could almost taste cinnamon as they read the captions, a phantom flavour triggered by imagination and empathy. The gallery lighting cast a soft sheen on the aluminum, highlighting scratches like constellations that traced journeys from oven to barracks to archive. Many walked away in silence, unwilling to break the contemplative spell that settled like flower dust in late afternoon sunbeams. In that quiet, the story continued to nourish, offering a calm counter-rhythm to narratives of violence. The faint hum of climate control units became a lullaby, underscoring the display. Scholars pushed further, commissioning lab analyses of residue scraped from preserved pie tins to confirm ingredients despite decades of exposure. Gas chromatography reports carried the sterile scent of solvents, yet revealed peaks corresponding to cinnamon aldehyde, clove oil, and apple ester, aligning science with oral testimony. Anthropologists measured the tin's alloy composition, noting how repeated heating left a patina that shimmered under microscope lights. The research papers referenced agricultural supply chains, tracing sugar deliveries along rail lines that rattled through night air laced with cinder grit. These analytical instruments sang a quiet hymn to kindness, validating that the desserts were as real as the fences they crossed. Technicians jotted notes with gloved hands that rustled like parchment, bridging lab precision and memory. Even in scientific jargon, the narrative tasted sweet, because every chromatograph peak translated into proof that intangible generosity had a tangible recipe. Readers could almost hear the scrape of knives across tin as they interpreted the data. The cool logic of the report suffused with the warmth of remembered ovens. The contrast between clinical precision and homely subject matter soothed like a lullaby, showing that compassion can be quantified without losing its softness. Researchers acknowledged the aroma in their field notes, noting how the lab's filtered air briefly filled with imagined spice as they handled the artifacts. Windstrokes bare branches, data columns glow, late-night lamps hum, and the pie story breathes steady within graphs. Digital archivists later scanned these documents under cool LED beams, the machines emitting a soft whir that blended with distant HVAC sighs. They catalogued thousands of images, ration cards smelling faintly of cardboard, photographs where prisoners bit into crusts while sunlight striped their uniforms, radio transcripts recounting dessert menus. Metadata fields captured farm coordinates, the cadence of oral histories, even background sounds like crickets chirping during interviews. By translating tactile artifacts into pixels, archivists risked flattening their sensory richness, so they embedded audio clips of crackling crust and cheering cicadas to preserve atmosphere. This modern rediscovery loop ensured that hospitality carried forward into new media without losing flavour. The glow of monitors painted their faces in soft blues, contrasting with the warm stories they preserved. Listening to those digitized sounds through headphones, one hears rustling leaves and soft laughter layered beneath the crack of crust, and the mind drifts to nights when kindness wore work boots. The glow of the screen bathes the viewer in cool light, yet the story warms like cocoa cupped in chilled fingers. Does the pie lose meaning when translated into pixels, or does the hospitality expand with every download? The uncertainty tastes like vanilla lingering on the palate, gentle and open to interpretation. In that virtual hush, the motif continues to nourish, inviting reflection more than proclamation. The faint buzz of electronics becomes background harmony for the sleeping history. Some schools incorporated pie baking workshops into history lessons, filling classrooms with the aroma of butter and nutmeg as students measured ingredients using replicas of wartime ration cups. Teachers projected photographs of the camps onto whiteboards while mixers whirred, the sound illustrating how daily life blended industry with domesticity. Students kneaded dough on desks dusted with flour, feeling the tacky pull that once gripped prisoners' palms as they turned labour into sustenance. They read aloud excerpts from diaries, voices echoing against cinder-block walls painted institutional beige, grounding abstract history in tactile experience. Finished pies cooled on wire racks, their steam curling around stacks of textbooks, proving that learning can taste as fragrant as remembrance. The halls smelled sweeter than cafeteria lines, teaching through scent as well as story. The students ate in near silence, not from reprimand, but from the awe that settles when a story moves from page to palate. Sweetness coated their tongues as they imagined the surprise these desserts offered to men who had braced for punishment instead. They watched crumbs scatter across lined notebooks, symbols of how history fragments yet still nourishes. Teachers dimmed the lights, letting the soft hum of the HVAC and the faint clink of forks create a lullaby rhythm. In that mellow glow, the motif of pie bridged eras, telling young listeners that compassion can outlast conflict. Their laughter, when it returned, sounded softer, wrapped in the comfort of shared taste. On modern Midwestern farms, descendants of those generous families host twilight gatherings where pies still bake in cast-iron skillets seasoned by decades of use. The kitchens smell of browned butter and rain, soaked soil tracked in from fields, while vintage radio programs play softly in the background. Guests sit on reclaimed church pews polished smooth, listening to elders describe the nights when German prisoners filled their barns with laughter instead of fear. Mason jars of preserved fruit gleam on shelves, their syrup catching lamplight as stories pour forth with the slow cadence of rivers. Each gathering ends with slices served on mismatched china, the clink of forks echoing past hospitality. The walls, coated in fresh paint, still harbour echoes of flour-dusted hands and hushed gratitude. Those twilight circles cultivate a hush that feels verdant, as if kindness sprouts again whenever crust meets filling. Elders pause between sentences, letting the scent of cardamom and the drone of cicadas fill the gaps that words cannot. The younger generation listens with hands still dusted from chores, recognizing that memory can be as tactile as the wooden table beneath their palms. The stories roll forward gently, reminding everyone present that expectation of punishment can dissolve when hospitality arrives steaming and sincere. Lantern light sways, Meadowlarks settle, enamel plates glow softly, and the night air carries cinnamon deeper into the fields. In recent decades, sister city programs invited former prisoners and farmers to share commemorative meals, forging reconciliation around long tables draped with linen smelling faintly of lavender starch. Chefs recreated the wartime pies using heirloom apples and locally churned butter, their knives tapping rhythmically against wooden boards. Translators hovered nearby, though often they were unnecessary because the language of tasting proved sufficient. Photographers captured steam rising from fresh slices while string quartets played softly, their bows brushing strings in time with the clink of crystal tumblers filled with cider. These events provided a new archive, alive and resonant, anchoring the motif in present-day fellowship. Candles flickered in glass hurricanes, throwing warm reflections onto smiling faces. The gatherings often ended with embraces prolonged enough for guests to catch the scent of flower on each other's sleeves, confirming that reconciliation can be inhaled as well as spoken. Tears mingled with laughter, leaving a salty sweet aftertaste that mirrored the desserts cooling nearby. Participants lingered in doorways, unwilling to break the spell that settled like powdered sugar in lamplight shafts. In their shared quiet, they felt the weight of history lighten, as though the pies standing between them had absorbed decades of suspicion. The motif endured, generous and fragrant, teaching that hospitality is a language capable of rewriting endings. Footsteps on cobblestones receded softly, carrying the aroma into night alleys. Now, when night deepens and train horns stretch across fields that once echoed with the cadence of marching boots, the story breathes in the spaces between scents. Somewhere, a pie cools on a sill, steam drifting like a messenger toward anyone still listening for a sign that compassion can arrive without fanfare. The expectation of punishment remains part of the history, a shadow trailing every retelling. Yet the warmth of pastry keeps softening its outline, inviting consideration of how fragile choices change the texture of conflict. Lamplight trembles on metal tins, mixing with crickets and distant threshers, suggesting that hospitality never fully settles into archive pages. It flickers on, asking to be tasted anew. The mystery endures because no ledger can fully capture why enemies accepted dessert or why hosts offered it. And so the aroma wanders through barns and museums alike, promising another unseen night when crust, spice and courage will meet in quiet company. Long after the last watchtower silhouette blurred into sunrise haze, the story drifted into the era when television sets glowed blue in farmhouse parlours, their cabinets smelling faintly of varnish and ozone. Families gathered at night, the volume turned low so as not to disturb sleeping infants, and watched documentaries that spoke of battlefields while pies cooled unseen in the kitchen. Between commercial jingles, elders leaned toward the screen and whispered that the program had missed something essential, that no narrator mentioned the taste of cinnamon that once softened guard shifts. The television light flickered across enamel pie plates, stacked like symbols in a glass front cupboard, each plate a quiet witness to a hospitality the broadcasts forgot. When late-night test patterns hummed, the elders rose, padded across linoleum chilled by prairie drafts, lifted a cloth shrouding a pie, and inhaled a fragrance that kept their memories awake in gentler ways than the images on the screen. In those years when jukeboxes crooned in diners built along two-lane highways, truckers hauling wheat paused for coffee and percussion of ceramic mugs, meeting former guards who now wore seed company jackets instead of uniforms. They traded stories over slices of chocolate chess pie laid on formica counters that still smelled of fresh wax, and the jukebox glow painted the chrome with muted rose. A jazz trio playing on the radio folded trumpet sighs into the conversation as the men compared the sweetness before them to pies baked for the prisoners under their watch. The counterwoman, tie-dyed scarf pinned neatly, refilled cups and listened. The clink of ice against glass punctuating the revelation that kindness had once shared a bunkhouse with razor wire. Outside, rain tapped the diner awning like a snare drum. the rhythm steady enough to lull even the most restless veteran. When the first long-distance phone calls crackled across continents, their static carrying the salts of undersea cables, a former prisoner dialed the Kansas farmhouse number from a small village nestled among vineyards. The call connected through an operator whose headset smelled of Bakelite and lavender hair tonic, and the voices met again in a space filled with hissing line noise and the faint ticking of wall clocks separated by oceans. They hesitated, expecting time to have crusted over their bond, yet the sound of shared laughter returned with the ease of slicing through butter-soft pastry. The prisoner described the way German flour now rose in homage to those Midwestern lessons. The farmer spoke of grandsons learning to lattice crusts during winter evenings. The crackling call ended with promises of exchanged recipes mailed in padded envelopes scented with cedar drawliners, proof that even technology carried hints of warming spice when guided by memory. During the era when vinyl records spun with psychedelic colours at campus listening parties, history students at a liberal arts college uncovered a box labelled Camp Correspondence in a library basement that smelled of damp stone and old glue. They threaded brittle tapes through a reel-to-reel player rescued from the drama department, its indicator lights glowing soft amber as the machine hummed to life. Voices from the past unfurled through the speakers like lullaby fog, recounting the astonishment of prisoners who expected shackles but tasted rhubarb. The students baked pies in communal dorm kitchens, their aprons splattered with berries, as they transcribed the testimonies on onion skin paper that rustled like leaves. Those late-night sessions left the hallways perfumed with butter and dust, and their new journalism essays, typed on machines whose keys echoed like muted typewriter percussion, reintroduced the story to a generation learning to protest with both fists and open palms. As astronauts began orbiting above cornfields, families carried transistor radios into backyards smelling of mown hay to hear the voices describing liftoff over the same frequencies that once carried farm reports. During these watch parties, the older generation used the lulls between capsule updates to explain how German prisoners had looked up at those same night skies, expecting punishment and receiving pie instead. Children chewing on apple turnovers wrapped in waxed paper listened with wide eyes. The pastry flakes catching in the glow of citronella candles meant to keep mosquitoes at bay. The radios crackled with telemetry beeps, a rhythm reminiscent of the heartbeat they felt when first daring to feed enemies, and the aroma of fresh dessert braided itself with the metallic scent of lawn-folding chairs. Stars wheeled overhead, indifferent yet somehow companionable, reflecting off the aluminum tins arranged on picnic tables like miniature lunar surfaces. Around the time when protest songs strummed through folk festivals held in meadows flattened by footfalls, a violinist tuned her instrument beside a patchwork quilt spread on dewy grass. Between sets she told the audience, her breath visible in the cool evening, about her grandmother who smuggled pies past camp gates while humming lullabies. The violin's spruce body carried the scent of rosin and aged varnish, and each note she drew seemed to echo the rising steam of a freshly cut slice. Festival goers sat on overturned apple crates, their hands wrapped around tin mugs of mulled cider that misted the night air, and listened as the musician explained that kindness can be as radical as any march. Fireflies blinked in sync with her bow strokes, and when applause rolled across the meadow, it had the gentle hush of wind caressing wheat. In the era when community theatres revived radio plays, using Foley tables crafted from barn doors and washboards, actors rustled paper to mimic footsteps on straw, while narrators spoke of German labourers expecting discipline so sharp it could cut their tongues. Instead, the script described enamel plates heavy with pie, and the Foley artist crushed pastry crust beside a microphone to replicate the tender crackle. The studio smelled of stage makeup mixed with coffee brewed in percolators that hissed like old radiators, and the audience, tuning in from living rooms illuminated by floor lamps with tasseled shades, heard the story anew. Old metronomes salvaged from music classrooms kept time for dialogue cues, their wooden cases polished by hands that once recorded crop rotations. The drama's closing line floated through static, assuring listeners that true authority sometimes tastes like cloven butter instead of iron. During the wave of heritage tourism that encouraged travellers to trace ancestral footsteps, tour buses rumbled down gravel roads toward campsites long since repurposed to fairgrounds. Inside the buses, air conditioning breathed out a scent of Freon, and guides spoke softly into handheld microphones wrapped in foam covers, narrating how prisoners expected reprisals yet received dessert. Passengers unwrapped scones sold at rest stops fashioned from renovated depots, the pastry sugar-dusting travel brochures printed on glossy paper. They stepped onto the grounds where hay now lay in neat bales, the original barracks replaced by pavilions echoing with livestock auctioneers. The guides pointed to a single surviving chimney, its bricks warmed by afternoon sun, and described how, in another era, pie steam mingled with the earthy aroma of feed troughs. Visitors inhaled deeply, imagining the sweetness resurrected by imagination alone, and recorded the moment on camcorders whose whirring motors imitated distant cicadas. As interest in slow food blossomed, culinary historians in aprons embroidered with herb motifs hosted workshops in converted granaries, their beams smelling of toasted barley and old timber. They laid vintage rolling pins across linen runners, each pin tagged with provenance: a Nebraska farmstead, a Colorado orchard, a Michigan lakeshore kitchen. Attendees ground spices with mortar and pestle, releasing fragrances that lifted like incense toward rafters. The instructors read aloud from shipping manifests stored in regional archives, the papers scented with graphite and leather, revealing how sacks of barley and crates of apples travelled along branch lines to camps where prisoners expected discipline but tasted pie. Participants kneaded dough while listening to field recordings of harmoniums and pump organs used in camp chapels, the old instruments wheezing compassion into the present. The workshop ended with a candlelit tasting, only the soft scrape of forks disturbing the reverent silence. When the digital age turned archives into glowing screens, coders volunteering for a history collective designed a virtual reality experience that recreated the moment a prisoner stepped into a barn smelling of hay and fresh pastry. Users donned headsets lined with foam and brushed suede, their senses surrounded by 3D audio rendering of distant train bells and the hum of milking machines. Subtle scent diffusers released notes of cinnamon and sawdust, while haptic gloves simulated the warmth of the porcelain plate placed into expectant hands. The program included toggled footnotes that hovered like soft fireflies, citing letters, inspection reports, and diaries for each sensory detail. People removed the headsets with cheeks damp from unexpected tears, the straps carrying a faint trace of lavender disinfectant, and realized the kindness once sequestered in paper records now breathed through circuits. Even in pixelated moonlight, the pies radiated the promise that hospitality can be coded into futures as well as pasts. In the years when mindfulness practices spread across yoga studios filled with the scent of sandalwood and orange peel, facilitators guided participants through meditations centered on the act of sharing dessert with a stranger. Their voices softened to match the rhythm of Tibetan singing bowls resonating like distant church bells. They invited attendees to visualize German prisoners bracing for harshness but receiving slices fragrant with nutmeg instead. Mats cushioned tired knees while vanilla-infused candles memorialized the aroma that once curled through camp corridors. After the session, herbal tea steeped in ceramic pots painted with wheat motifs was ladled into cups, and the gentle clink of porcelain replaced military cadence as the sound anchoring the moment. Participants left feeling grounded in a history that proved compassion involves both breath and butter. As genealogy websites blossomed, descendants traced their lineage to both the prisoners and the farmers, discovering shared surnames tucked into census sheets that smelled faintly of toner ink and manila folders. Virtual message boards became perfumed by imagination, threads titled after pie flavors spinning stories in digital warmth. One conversation led to a reunion at a lakeside lodge where pine sap spiced the air and loon calls stitched dusk together. Family members brought heirloom recipes written on brittle cards, their edges browned and curling like crust. They compared handwriting, finding loops that matched across languages, and they baked side by side in a commercial kitchen humming with refrigeration compressors. The ovens exhaled a melody of butter, and the dining hall filled with the hush that falls when generational bridges knit themselves through shared flavour. In the era when podcast microphones hovered above teak desks cluttered with archival photos, hosts recorded episodes that unfolded like bedtime tales, their voices wrapped in velvet. Sound designers layered in the soft creak of barn doors, the gentle clatter of enamelware, and the low murmur of guards trading watch rotations over cups of chicory. They interviewed historians who described ledgers stored in acid-free boxes, the faint scent of lignin reminding listeners how delicate paper can be. Each episode closed with the host reading a dessert recipe step by step, the cadence slow enough to lull even anxious hearts, so that the audience fell asleep imagining enemies tasting mercy. The download numbers climbed silently on server dashboards, another form of proof that hospitality still soothed across earbuds and midnight hours. During the wave of artisan letters and calligraphy revivals, artists dipped nibs into bottles scented with clove oil, the ink shimmering as it met cotton paper embossed with wheat sheaves. They hand-lettered excerpts from testimonies describing the first bite of pie behind barbed boundaries, each flourish echoing steam curling from crust. The finished sheets hung in galleries housed in repurposed malhouses, the air thick with the memory of roasted grains. Visitors traced the loops of script without touching, their fingertips hovering as though the words were fragile pastry. A harpist seated near a row of sack carts plucked chords resonant as oven doors closing, and the delicate music guided guests through the exhibit with the hush of a lullaby. The gallery's scent of beeswax polish and aged timber amplified the softness of the story, leaving patrons reluctant to step back into the bright clatter of the street. As civil rights movements pressed for wider justice, activists preparing for marches gathered in church basements where folding tables groaned under potluck offerings. Among the casseroles and cornbread sat pies baked in tribute to those wartime acts of cross-cultural grace. Organisers sliced them with steady hands, distributing sweetness before speeches that smelled of mint tea and candle smoke. They cited the precedent of farm families who defied expectation and fed those labelled enemies, arguing that solidarity can be served in dessert course as well as policy. The thump of gospel drums and the rise of soulful choir harmonies merged with the clink of pie servers against tin, weaving past kindness into present courage. The basement's concrete walls cooled the warm air, keeping the aroma close so that every deep breath tasted like resolve. When machine quilters programmed long-arm devices to stitch commemorative textiles, the hum of servo motors filled studio barns built with reclaimed planks smelling of linseed oil. They stitched patterns of lattice crusts intertwined with strands of barbed wire, gently untwisted, thread colours running from cinnamon brown to cream. Fabric panels depicted guards and prisoners seated at rough-hewn tables, their silhouettes softened by appliqued steam. Each quilt block referenced a source, a diary entry, a Swiss inspection note, a tape transcript, and the documentation hung beside the finished piece in plastic sleeves zipped to keep the scent of cotton and starch intact. Quilt guilds displayed the works at fairs, the same fairgrounds once traversed by POW labour detachments, and the quilts fluttered in crosswinds scented with kettle corn and sawdust. Visitors traced the stitches with eyes, letting the texture soothe like a hand resting lightly on a shoulder. As contemporary composers scored symphonies inspired by home-front stories, orchestras rehearsed in halls lined with acoustic panels smelling faintly of cedar. The percussion section employed baking sheets and wooden spoons, to capture the sound of crust being tapped before serving, while strings swelled to mimic steam rising into quiet rafters. Clarinetists practiced passages representing night guards humming lullabies they half remembered from childhood. The conductor, her baton polished to a satin sheen, guided the musicians through movements named after ingredients: cardamom dawn, molasses dusk, custard midnight. At premieres, audiences leaned back in plush seats upholstered in velvet, breathing in the mingled aroma of concert programs freshly printed and the faint butter scent conjured by suggestion. The final chord lingered like a lingering taste, and applause rippled gently, more caress than storm. In the age of food trucks and pop-up markets, a vintage military field kitchen truck, painted a soft sage green and smelling of diesel tempered by vanilla, parked beside town squares at twilight. Volunteers wearing aprons patterned with wheat stalks served slices of heirloom pies to curious crowds. Chalkboards propped against the wheel wells told the story of prisoners who expected punishment, but met generosity, the text written in looping handwriting that invited close reading. Acoustic guitarists perched on the tailgate strummed lullabies while leaves rustled overhead. The crowd ate slowly, the crunch of crust mingling with the murmur of evening traffic, understanding that they were savoring a history lesson as much as dessert. Lanterns hung from the canopy swayed in the breeze, scattering lemon-scented citronella into the summer air. When memory care centers introduced sensory therapy, staff baked pies using recipes sourced from camp-era archives, filling the halls with aromas designed to awaken long, quiet recollections. Residents traced their fingers around the fluted crusts, the pastry warm enough to thaw arthritic knuckles. In the background, a phonograph played lullabies in German and English, the vinyl's gentle hiss reminiscent of the wind slipping through tall grass. Some residents murmured names they had not spoken in decades, eyes glistening like glaze under soft fluorescence. Therapists wearing cardigans that smelled of cedar wardrobes recorded the stories that bubbled up, adding another layer to the living archive. The therapy mats cushioned feet as participants swayed side to side, their movements guided by the same rhythm that once paced guard patrols, now softened to rocking chair tempo. In beachfront towns where sea salt scented the breeze, former prisoners settled into retirement cottages painted in muted seaside blues. They baked pies using seafood spices, anisey, lemon zest to suit the coast, yet still told visitors about the crusts they first encountered beside Kansas wheat. Porch swings creaked in time with the surf, gulls crying overhead like distant barracks whistles. They kept scrapbooks on wicker tables, the pages smelling of sunscreen and glue, filled with clippings about American farmers who served dessert instead of discipline. Neighbors brought over choufle pies, and together they watched the horizon fade into dusk, agreeing that kindness travels farther than shipping lanes. The clink of wind chimes punctuated their recollections, tinkling like tin cups in grateful hands. As climate shifts altered growing seasons, agricultural extension agents experimented with drought-resistant grains to continue the pie tradition. Test plots rustled under sensors mounted on poles, the devices ticking softly as they recorded soil moisture. In demonstration kitchens built beside the fields, chefs kneaded dough from new varieties, the flour carrying a nutty scent. They invited visitors to taste slices baked from recipes annotated in camp ledgers, now adapted to modern climate realities. The implication was gentle yet resolute. Even as conditions changed, the commitment to hospitality remained. Solar panels warmed the ovens, and the quiet hum of inverters joined the ambient chorus of cicadas and distant irrigation pumps, echoing the original blend of industry and tenderness. When literary salons returned to popularity and neighborhood bookshops smelling of espresso and old paper, authors read from novels that wove the pie story into fictional tapestries. Listeners nestled into armchairs upholstered in velvet the color of ripe cherries, their hands cupping lattes sprinkled with cocoa. The writers described characters who expected punishment but found sweetness. the narrative arcs grounded in archival citations printed in appendices. Between chapters, a cellist bowed gentle phrases that fluttered like recipe cards turned by curious fingers. The audience listened with eyes half closed, letting the words settle like powdered sugar on a countertop, understanding that fiction can carry truth's aroma when carefully baked. In the era of satellite classrooms beaming lessons to rural districts, teachers broadcast from studios lined with reclaimed barnwood, their microphones capturing the warmth of their voices. They used document cameras to show close-ups of pie tins etched with tiny dents, explaining how each mark belonged to a night when courage wore an apron. Students miles away watched on tablets smelling of plastic and notebook paper, their styluses tapping gentle rhythms as they took notes. Homework assignments included interviewing elders about dessert memories, and returned essays carried smudges of flour from enterprising bakers. The screens may have been cold to the touch, yet the story they carried radiated the same gentle heat as the ovens once stationed near guard towers. As international art biennials sought installations blending taste and narrative, a chef artist collaborated with perfumers and historians to craft an immersive pavilion. Visitors entered through a corridor scented with campfire ash, stepping onto floorboards salvaged from a dismantled granary. The central room housed a long table set with porcelain plates, each accompanied by a VR headset and earbuds. When participants donned the devices, they heard a harmonica, a distant tractor, softly spoken German and English phrases, while the perfumers released precise notes of baked apple, hay and wool. The plates warmed subtly, heating elements tucked beneath them humming like snoring guard dogs. The experience ended with a real slice served in silence, the lingering flavour encouraging contemplation more than commentary. During the resurgence of handwritten letter exchanges, pen pals spanning continents sent each other sachets filled with ground spices chosen to evoke the camp kitchens. Envelopes arrived scented with star anise, brown sugar, or citrus peel, and recipients opened them beside windows fogged by kettle steam. They shared updates about community gardens, choir rehearsals, and museum exhibits, always returning to the lesson of expecting punishment, yet receiving pie. Old fountain pens scratched across paper made from recycled straw, each stroke a soft percussion against the tabletop. When the letters stacked up, their combined aroma transformed desk drawers into archives of fragrance, proof that kindness can travel through postal routes as surely as it once travelled down dusty farm lanes. As streaming platforms produced gentle documentaries meant for evening unwinding, cinematographers filmed fields at golden hour, microphones capturing the hush of breeze through tasseling corn. The narration, spoken in a voice as soft as wool, described the astonishment of prisoners whose first American dessert melted away fear. Cameras lingered on antique stoves, on hands measuring cinnamon with spoons dented by decades, on ledger entries written in looping ink. Audio engineers blended the faint thump of kneaded dough with mechanical clicks from typewriters, creating a soundtrack equal parts kitchen and office. Viewers curled under quilts on couches smelling of fabric softener, letting the story escort them towards sleep, the final credits rolling to the sound of a pie cooling on a sill. When community choirs hosted twilight services in arboretums, the air rich with leaf mold and night-blooming flowers, they dedicated entire programs to songs inspired by the dessert diplomacy. Arrangements of lullabies wove in lyrics about unexpected sweets, and bass voices rumbled like distant thunder, while sopranos shimmered like pie steam. Candles floated on reflecting pools, their flames mirrored against the dark water, and the choir director traced arcs in the air, guiding harmonies gentle as whipped cream. Attendees sat on wooden benches, still rough from the sawmill, resting cups of spiced cider on laps draped with shawls. The final chord faded into crickets, and listeners departed in near silence, hearts cradling both the sorrow of war and the solace of shared crust. In the quiet hours of 24-hour libraries, night shift archivists wore fingerless gloves to keep warm as they digitized fragile recipe pamphlets. Their desks held small electric heaters emitting a faint tin scent, and mugs of chamomile waited nearby, steam curling under fluorescent lights. Through the hush, the only sounds were the soft click of scanner lids and the whisper of tissue paper wrapping artifacts. They knew that each high-resolution image preserved the memory of prisoners who expected punishment, but tasted welcome instead. When the shift ended, they stepped into dawn air, sharp with frost, and carried home the aroma of old pages clinging to their scarves, a gentle souvenir of labour done in service of hospitality. In bustling city markets where commuters hurried past stalls, a baker set up shop at the corner where the scent of roasted chestnuts met the tang of diesel. Her display case gleamed with pies named after counties that once hosted camps, each slice accompanied by a card quoting a line from testimony. She wore a baker's cap dusted in flour, and her hands moved with the surety of someone who knows kindness can be portioned generously. Morning cyclists stopped for a slice and a story, the spokes of their wheels clicking like distant Morse code. The market's canopy flapped overhead, stirring the aroma into the rush-hour air, reminding passers-by that compassion can catch you mid-stride and feed you before you even realize you're hungry. When vocational schools taught refrigeration repair, instructors used the tale to explain why maintaining consistent oven temperatures mattered for more than technical perfection. Students leaned over compressors smelling of oil, while the instructor, voice rumbling like a well-tuned engine, described farmers staying up through stormy nights to keep pies warm for men who expected cold shoulders. The lesson manuals bore grease smudges and penciled notes linking BTUs to memories. Apprentices realized that their meticulous adjustments might one day protect both flavor and dignity, a thought that settled over the workshop like a soft gauze. Metal tools clinked back into drawers with the same tender care once given to pie servers washed under pump water. As winters lengthened in some regions, ice fishing shacks transformed into storytelling hubs where propane heaters hissed and walls smelled of pine sap. Anglers baited lines beneath the floorboards while reciting the pie episode, their voices mingling with the muffled creak of lake ice. Thermoses of hot chocolate spiked with cinnamon circulated, the steam fogging insulated windows. The men and women inside wore wool caps knitted in patterns echoing lattice crusts, every stitch a nod to the desserts that softened wartime divides. Fish flopped in buckets lined with straw, and between checking lines the anglers remembered how generosity can surface even in the coldest seasons. When the era of tactile board games returned, designers launched a cooperative game set within a home front camp. Players moved tokens crafted from polished maple across a board illustrated with barns, kitchens, and barracks, the colors muted like faded photographs. The game smelled faintly of cardboard and ink, and it tasked participants with balancing regulations and compassion to ensure dessert reached prisoners expecting discipline. Dice carved from recycled rolling pins clicked gently against the table, and cooperative victories were celebrated with actual slices baked before play began. Families gathered around the table under pendant lights glowing warm as oven interiors, and the game's end credits read like a gratitude list for real people who once made the improbable possible. In the age when holographic displays shimmered in museum atriums, curators staged life-sized projections of kitchens bustling with wartime energy. Visitors walked through translucent scenes where bakers rolled dough, guards leaned against doorframes, and prisoners accepted plates with hesitant fingers. Motion sensors triggered whispers of dialogue culled from oral histories, the voices gentle as evening breezes. The hall smelled faintly of cedar from the display platforms, yet the holograms convinced noses they detected clove and butter. When the installation powered down at closing time, the fading light mirrored embers in a hearth, reassuring staff that they tended more than artifacts. They preserved a warmth that refused to extinguish. As digital musicians composed lullaby playlists for streaming services, tracks titled Custard Ceasefire and Lattice Mercy, layered piano, brushed snare drums, and field recordings of crickets. Meanwhile, the cover art featured faded photographs of pies perched on wooden windowsills, the edges softened like memories. Listeners still drifted to sleep with earbuds tucked into pillows, the faint hum carrying them back to barns where German soldiers, though expecting punishment, tasted solace. The playlists ranked high on charts for relaxation, their descriptions urging audiences to breathe deeply and imagine sharing dessert with those once labelled adversaries. Silence held between each sentence. Morning metrics delivered to smartphones smelled only of glass and circuitry. Instead, behind the data pulsed a story revealing a fragrance as warm nutmeg. On commuter trains slicing through fog-draped valleys, conductors announced stops in voices softened by early morning. In the quiet sections, a historian recorded an audiobook describing the pie episodes, her tone hushed to match the train's gentle sway. Passengers cupped travel mugs of chai and watched trees blur past, the beverage's spices reinforcing the tale's aroma. The rhythmic clack of wheels on rails echoed the cadence of work boots marching to fields, now softened into a lull that set eyelids drooping. By the time the train slid into the city, listeners carried the story with them like a shawl draped over shoulders, warmed by knowledge that hospitality once rode similar rails in the form of pies wrapped in cloth. When home canning revived as a hobby, enthusiasts gathered in kitchens where steam-clouded windows and glass jars clinked like soft bells. They simmered fillings based on camp-era recipes, adjusting ratios for pectin and sugar, while reading aloud the testimonies of prisoners who tasted these flavors instead of reprimand. The lids pinged as they sealed, each sound a note in a melody of preservation. Countertops carried the tang of vinegar and the sweetness of fruit, and the participants labeled jars with both ingredients and historical footnotes. Later, they mailed the jars to food banks, slipping in handwritten notes about the kindness tradition, ensuring the aroma of the past nourished present tables. In the late-night glow of neon diner signs beside deserts stretched beneath infinite stars, travelers ordered pie slices served by staff whose name tags bore familiar farm surnames. Milkshake blenders whirred, dripping condensation across chrome surfaces, while the jukebox played soft doo-wop harmonies. Truckers spoke of long hauls between cooperative elevators, referencing the old stories of prisoners expecting retribution yet savoring dessert. Wind raced across the highway, adding a sharp scent of sagebrush to the sweetness inside. The waitress refilled coffee, the pot's glass belly foggy with heat, and listened to the road-weary voices that still found comfort in a half-century-old act of kindness. As philanthropic foundations funded seed banks and culinary scholarships, grant applications referenced the legacy of pies in articulating their mission. Committees met in boardrooms scented with leather-bound binders and recycled air. Yet the proposals they read evoked barns, orchards and enamel plates. They approved funds for mobile kitchens that visited veterans centres, handing out slices while volunteers read excerpts from letters recounting the surprise of being fed. The grants carved new pathways for the story, ensuring the aroma of compassion rose wherever need appeared. Elevator chimes marked the end of meetings, and the board members stepped into lobbies with smiles mellow as butter left to soften on a counter. During snowbound evenings when the world muted under white blankets, families gathered around brick fireplaces fragrant with smoke and pine sap. They toasted marshmallows while a grandparent read from a self-bound booklet collecting the pie testimonies, the paper warmed by nearby flames. Outside, the snow muffled every sound, mirroring the hush that fell when the prisoners bit into unexpected sweetness. The family's dog curled by the hearth, twitching in dreams, while cocoa simmered on a trivet, its steam blending with tales of generosity. The youngest child traced pictures in frost on the window pane, drawing lattice patterns without realizing a lineage guided her fingers. As the sun rose on mornings when fog hugged riverbeds, kayakers paddled past campsites now overgrown with willow and reed. They paused to sip coffee from thermoses smelling of stainless steel, listening to their guide tell the dessert story in voices barely above the river's whisper. Dragonflies flicked across the surface like blue sparks, and the kayaks bobbed gently, the water lapping in a rhythm reminiscent of wooden spoons stirring filling. The guide produced a tin from his dry bag, revealing hand pies wrapped in wax paper, their crusts still flaky despite the humidity. The group ate with reverent silence, the taste mingling with the earthy scent of river mud and distant clover. In the era when bookstores revived the art of silent reading clubs, participants gathered amid shelves scented with ink and cedar plank flooring. They sat beneath pendant lights shaped like inverted mixing bowls, reading curated selections about unexpected hospitality. A baker stationed in the corner distributed miniature pies on paper doilies, asking only that diners absorb the story behind each flavour. The room remained quiet save for the whisper of turning pages and the occasional murmur as someone made a note in the margin. By night's end, the scent of cinnamon lingered like an affectionate farewell, and readers stepped into the moonlit street carrying tote bags filled with both books and leftover slices. As multi-generational choirs toured nursing homes, they carried portable ovens that filled recreation rooms with the scent of baking crust. Residents arranged in semicircle chairs wrapped in crocheted blankets listened to harmonies that described prisoners, expecting punishment yet tasting pie. The choristers' voices, youthful and seasoned alike, blended with the beep of monitoring equipment, transforming clinical spaces into kitchens. After each set, the choir broke bread, or rather, desserts, passing plates along lines of wheelchairs and walkers. Nurses leaned against door frames, their scrubs smelling of antiseptic and sugar, and wiped away tears. Bedside lamps cast halos on the walls, turning every slice into a small, glowing reassurance. In agricultural colleges experimenting with seed archives, students catalogued heritage apples once transported to camps. The labs smelled of chilled air, soil samples, and the sharp tang of iodine used for sterilizing tools. Under LED grow lights, saplings stretched toward artificial sunrise, while researchers noted leaf structure and sugar content. Professors reminded them that the sweetness they measured once fueled acts of defiant hospitality. Computer monitors displayed graphs tracing lineage across generations, and each data point represented a flavor that softened fear. The students' lab coats rustled like parchment, each pocket carrying the same sense of responsibility that once guided farmers to share beyond expectation. When snow melted into spring runoff, revealing the foundations of old guard posts, archaeologists set up tents smelling of wet canvas and fresh coffee. They sifted soil through mesh screens, the grit scratching softly against metal, and recovered fragments of ceramic pie plates decorated with blue cornflowers. Nearby, they erected a field lab where microscopes focused on glaze, revealing fingerprints baked into the underside. The archaeologists logged findings on waterproof paper clipped to boards spattered with mud, connecting each shard to deposit layers labelled with phrases such as Hospitality Horizon. At dusk, they compared notes under lanterns buzzing with moths, their conversation threaded with the hum of portable generators. The fragments, cradled in foam-filled cases, proved that even broken pieces smelled faintly of spice when warmed by human touch. As international pen and ink artists exchanged sketchbooks, one volume circulated depicting nothing but pies in camp settings, each page washed with watercolours tinted like caramel. Artists added scenes of guards leaning on shovels, of prisoners seated cross-legged on hay, all bathed in light as soft as dusk. The sketchbook travelled in padded envelopes, lined with tissue infused with cedar, crossing customs desks where officials smiled at the subject matter. When the book returned to its originator, it carried the scent of many studios: linseed oil, chalk, incense, citrus cleaner. The compiled artwork formed a visual lullaby, a ring-bound choir of pages singing about expectation dissolved by unexpected dessert. In the age of therapeutic drumming circles, percussionists gathered in barns that now served as community centres, their hands tapping djembes and frame drums in rhythms echoing heartbeat and train wheels. Between songs, they spoke of the story, letting the drumheads vibrate with resonance that matched the trembling anticipation of men who once awaited punishment. A baker sat nearby, pulling pies from a portable oven, the crusts crackling like snare rolls. Participants combined the beats with bites, realizing that both rhythm and flavor can ground a community, guiding breath into calm. Straw bales served as benches, their dry grass scent blending with cinnamon, creating a fragrance both earthy and sweet. As the narrative entered classrooms taught by veterans of more recent conflicts, the instructors stood beside whiteboards marker, scented and clean. They described walking into foreign villages expecting hostility yet receiving bread, linking their experiences to the pies once served to German prisoners. Students scribbled notes with mechanical pencils whose lead clicked like distant Morse, and the conversation meandered toward how acts of unexpected hospitality ripple through history. The classroom clock ticked gentle seconds, each click reminiscent of spoon against plate. When the bell chimed, rather than scatter, the students stayed to discuss, the smell of dry erase still sharp in the air, the story settling into their understanding of duty and compassion. In coastal lighthouses converted into museums, curators filled former keeper quarters with exhibits exploring food diplomacy. Salt air wafted through open windows, carrying the muffled crash of waves against rocks. Visitors climbed spiral staircases polished by generations of hands, emerging into rooms where vintage camp photographs lined walls painted the pale blue of faded uniforms. The exhibit's centerpiece was a reconstructed galley table, laid with enamelware and a holographic pie radiating a virtual aroma triggered by proximity sensors. The curators played recordings of foghorns blended with the gentle cadence of guards recounting dessert deliveries. The lighthouse lantern above rotated slowly, casting soft bands of light that mimicked the passing of time, reminding all present that beacons of gentleness can guide as surely as beams cutting through night fog. In the era when artisan ice cream makers infused flavors with narrative, a small creamery tucked beside sunflower fields introduced a limited edition called Truce Pie. Customers entered the parlor, greeted by a bell tinkling like cutlery, and inhaled the scent of waffle cones baking on cast iron presses. The flavor combined apple compote, cinnamon, and pastry flakes, each scoop served with a card summarizing the story. The churns whirred at a steady pace, their metal sides chilled and gleaming, while patrons sat on stools upholstered in flour sack fabric. The ice cream melted slowly, replicating the warmth of the original pies, even in frozen form, and the parlor's jukebox played gentle swing that sounded like a memory tapping a shoulder. As people increasingly cultivated rooftop gardens in cities, planters sprouted heritage grains and dwarf fruit trees tended by hands stained with potting soil. Gardeners hosted twilight salons among string lights humming with bees drawn to fragrant blossoms. They placed portable induction burners on shipping pallets to bake pies as the sun dipped behind skyline silhouettes, the ovens emitting soft fans that blended with the distant rumble of subway trains. Guests sipped herbal infusions steeped with rosemary and lemon, listening to the story of prisoners who braced for punishment but found sweetness among strangers. The rooftop air mixed scents of diesel, hot asphalt cooling, and fresh pastry, proving that hospitality can bloom even above concrete canyons. In the stillness of meditation apps guided by nature sounds, narrators whispered about the pie story as rain pattered gently in the background. They invited listeners to imagine the weight of a warm plate in the palms, the cinnamon vapor rising to meet the breath, the soft murmur of gratitude exchanged in fractured languages. The app's digital interfaces glowed midnight blue, the loading animations swirling like steam. Users rested phones on bedside tables alongside books and chamomile sachets, letting the voice lead them towards sleep, with reassurances that kindness has a history as real as any battle. Morning arrived with notifications scented only metaphorically, yet the tranquility lingered like a crumb tucked safely on the tongue. The story continues to travel, passing softly through markets, museums, classrooms and kitchens, with the steady patience of bread dough rising beneath a damp cloth. Every retelling kneads fresh details into the loaf, ensuring that the memory of German prisoners expecting punishment but receiving pie remains warm enough to nourish new listeners. The aroma refuses to fade, slipping through cracked doors and over windowsills, drifting anywhere someone wonders whether gentleness can withstand the weight of war. It answers without trumpet or drum, offering instead the quiet exhale of cooling pastry and the sure knowledge that kindness, once tasted, lingers on the palate of history.